Good evening, and welcome to my recording of Mind Map 1 for Philosophy 3127 for Spring 2025. So, as requested, I'll begin with a small discussion of my mind map. So, as you can see, I've laid out the three sources and provided a box for each source that describes my general understanding of the major genre of argument that they're trying to make, and then I'm going to describe some of the major points that they make. And then I'm going to go into the relationships that they make between them, and then I'm going to discuss some of my thoughts on these connections. So, I'll begin with the first source that we provided during the first week, Altman. So Altman is a economic idealist when it comes to AI. So his major argument is that whenever AI becomes economically viable, whenever we have a system that is capable of understanding and making critical decisions, then labor becomes less of a component in modern economics. Of course, economics is a discipline. So economics is based off of the trade of resources throughout the world, and the major resources, which fundamentally underline all of the economic power in the world, include four different items. One of those items is labor. So traditionally, that is human labor, people that are doing work to create a product or a service that is valuable to someone else. So AI, um, Altman is suggesting, will eventually be able to substitute for those human beings. And as a result of that, um, that should provide a level of economic ability that we have not seen before. AI can do human jobs that require decision making and thought at a rate and with a precision that you cannot see with humans. Therefore, you can get much more labor productivity out of AI than you can a real human workforce. As a result of that, Altman argues that it then becomes possible to make a economic case for a stronger socialism in a way. He suggests in his writings that the United States can take the extra profit, tax some of it from major corporations, and then create a Pan-American wealth fund that is accessible to everyone in the country after they turn a certain age. So Hull discusses whether or not AI is dangerous and kind of that perception of the threat. So he discusses he mentions a little bit about how AI, entertainment and literature perceives AI, and kind of how he examines AI. Basically, he works through the argument of whether or not an AI system can pose a direct threat to human life or property someday. So he argues that that's probably not going to be possible for AI in the near future because a artificial intelligence is intelligent, it can make decisions. However, there's no motivation or understanding of a motivation that could destroy humanity. Right now, the only AI models that we have are machine learning or limited language model based, or learning language model based, language learning model. Therefore, these systems are dependent on human beings, not based off of its own decision making. Therefore, unless a bad actor, human being, decides to force the AI to do something nefarious, there will likely not be a direct threat. Gortzel more generally examines risk from the perspective of others' arguments about what risks it could pose. So he looks at arguments like Hole's and others, which basically explore whether or not AI is going to has the ability to pose a direct threat to human beings in the same way that Hole did. Um, he finds some arguments such as Bostrom's, where he states that AI could be a direct threat to life. Perhaps if AI is encouraged through bad training, it would be possible to create a system that would favor create doing some unnecessary action like shutting down transportation networks or medical centers and deliberately killing people through bad motivation. Um, or a intelligent system could be encouraged to think, or a different source I explore is it could be encouraged to think in a way that it would be motivated to kill human beings. That it could gain self-awareness or malevolence like a fictional AI. However, his ultimate argument in this case is that these all seem rather overdone. He believes that the danger from these risks isn't guaranteed. Of course, machine learning, bad training principles are something that's not necessarily guaranteed. That typically you can observe some of these negative responses during the training process and correct for them throughout. Therefore, in the end, AI is likely not to be a absolute guaranteed direct threat to human life or property. So I observed some interesting relationships between these sources. In general, I think the basic idea behind giving us these three sources is that we're looking at how human beings react to this new technology, AI. So, Altum is, I guess, more on the idealistic side of that spectrum, more on the positive idealistic side of that spectrum. Um, he doesn't really consider the possible negative downsides of AI or some of the economic implications that come from the work that he's done. Like he assumes that in the case that labor no longer becomes a relevant part of the economic equation due to AI, that's going to result in an economic boom, which will naturally support everyone and will result in an economic fund that where the corporate profits are turned into an economic share. Um, so, and in comparison, Hull is perhaps more idealistic in the negative sense. He looks more at what uh, the negatives of what could happen if artificial intelligence is truly possible, a AGI, a general intelligence that's capable of true decision making. He doesn't really consider what economic aspect, well, what the benefits to society could be from AI. And to some extent, these are both rather absolutist views. There's very much an assumption that, in one way or another, AI will have an absolute effect on humanity that will either be completely positive or completely negative. That will either completely transform society and provide a new sense of economic freedom or spell the end of humanity. Goetzel, I think, is more realistic and perhaps looks at that same sort of is AI a threat view that Hull is looking at. He is, of course, looking at, he, of course, analyzes the risk posed by AI as well. Um, but he argues that risk is not inherent to AI. Essentially, I think Altman and Hull are a bit more idealistic in how they look at this whole situation. While Goetzel perhaps like it has synthesized sources a bit better. I think he has a better picture of this issue than Hull does. However, again, to some extent, none of these sources consider the whole issue together. That there will be economic aspects that will come from the AI revolution that will potentially improve the state of humanity, but of course there are risks and things that must be regulated for. Of course, revealing the overall complexity of how people feel about this topic. So my personal analysis is similar to what it was during recitation. It's that overall, looking at all of these sources together and all of that I know from history and from engineering history is that this is a very familiar set of reactions. This kind of this is very similar to the set of reactions that you would observe following many of the other major technical revolutions, such as the Industrial Revolution. So, for example, and Hall and Goetzel, I believe, mentioned to some extent that in the literary world, there are many examples of AI being perceived as a risky thing. Um, Depending on an AI-driven system, could result in a machine that goes rogue and kills its creators. So, for example, the Terminator and HAL 9000 were listed in one of the sources. Um, so, and of course, Hull and Goetzel even considering the idea that AI could be a direct threat, to the degree that's been done, does suggest that there's a sense of discomfort that comes from the possibility of such a technology. This is very similar to what happened whenever the railroads and industry in general were developed in the early to mid 19th century. For example, when the Stockton and Darlington and the Liverpool and Manchester railways were first built in the early 1830s, there are several sensationalist newspaper articles that came out where writers argued that if you traveled over 20 miles an hour, the women who were pregnant would in the trains would miscarry, and whenever they passed by a flock of animals, they'd all die because of the great speeds of 20 miles an hour, whatever the trains are passing at. Romanticist writers such as Thoreau, in general, were very unhappy about how um, about industrialism and believed that industry in general brought people away from um, who they're supposed to be. So in general, I think in the same way that we're seeing here, historically, there's been many revolutions where you can observe a a discomfort that comes from these new technologies. Regulations are introduced as a result of these discomforts. Goetzel and Hull kind of mentioned this, but I believe the best source for this is Senate Bill 1047. This is mentioned in the recitation and by some other people who spoke. This is the bill that California put forward to try and regulate the development of AI. Basically, this bill is meant to kind of regulate the amount of oversight that a machine learning company is given from the government and by society in general. And most interestingly, part of the provisions and requirement is a ability to safely and quickly shut down the system if we're to start going rogue. So I think, in a way, that both of these things together suggest a sort of general unease about this technology. That there is a implicit and direct threat to human life and property and society. However, I believe that, like Goetzel, that there is no guarantee of apocalypse. A machine learning model, become well, the development of a machine learning model doesn't necessarily mean that that machine learning model is antagonistic, that it will be malevolent. There's no guarantee it's going to come to life and try to kill everyone. I believe that just like the railroads and like industrialization, there are going to be many big societal changes. When the Industrial Revolution came, we saw many large protests, the formation of unions, the structure of society and culture changed as a result. However, we didn't have an apocalypse. No, not everybody died. In general, I believe that this is going to be very complex change that will come as a result of AI. We're not going to see death. We're not going to see the economic idealism that Altman's talking about. We're probably going to see something a bit in between, a sort of future where maybe, yes, labor isn't as important in the economic equation, but maybe some other factor will come up, and likely we'll probably still have some kind of labor force. I don't know that we will have a sort of AGI that's capable of taking over everyone's jobs, and whether or not we will have the hardware to be able to take care of all of that. In fact, one of the biggest challenges in machine learning is that there's no implicit ability for a machine learning model to build its own hardware. You must have a human being assemble the hardware themselves, and then perhaps if you give a AI system access to machinery, it could do that itself someday. But that's not that's likely in the far distant future. Anyway, that should be everything. Thank you so much for listening. Please forgive some of the ramblings that I've had. Hopefully they make sense. And see you in 2 weeks.